Ever seen karma work in real time? Watch what happens when a luxury hotel refuses to serve the wrong man. A sleek black Rolls-Royce Phantom pulled up to the grand entrance of the Lexington Grand Hotel. The doorman barely glanced up. The valet, a young man in his 20s, hesitated before stepping forward. The driver, dressed in a crisp suit, exited first and walked around to open the back door. Out stepped Jonathan Carter, tall, confident, dressed in an elegant navy suit. He carried the presence of a man who built his empire from the ground up. As he adjusted his cufflinks and glanced toward the hotel's gleaming chandeliers through the massive glass doors, he was well aware of where he stood. The Lexington Grand wasn't just a hotel, it was one of the most exclusive in the country, a place where power brokers and CEOs gathered. But as Jonathan took his first step forward, he felt it. The stares, not the kind that came with admiration, but the kind that questioned his presence. The doorman's forced smile didn't reach his eyes. The shift in posture, the subtle discomfort, it wasn't new to Jonathan. He'd seen this before, too many times. But he ignored it. He had come for business. He wasn't here to make a point, at least not yet. Inside, the marble floors gleamed under the warm lights, and soft classical music drifted through the grand lobby. Jonathan walked with quiet purpose toward the front desk. A young woman glanced up from her computer, her posture stiff. For a brief moment, she seemed taken aback, as if she couldn't place him. Then, with a rehearsed smile, she said, "Good evening, sir. Can I help you?" Jonathan placed his phone on the counter, displaying his reservation confirmation. "Yes, I have a reservation. Presidential suite." Her eyes flicked toward the screen. There was a pause. Her smile faded. Something changed in her demeanor. She glanced at a middle-aged coworker in a navy blazer, then back at Jonathan. A long silence followed. "I'm sorry, sir. There seems to be an issue with your reservation," she said, her fingers hesitating over the keyboard. Jonathan raised an eyebrow. "What kind of issue?" She exhaled lightly, glancing around as if searching for backup. "Unfortunately, the suite has already been given away. We're completely booked tonight." The lie was blatant. Insultingly so. Behind her, a digital screen still listed the presidential suite as available. Jonathan had played this game before, but this time he wasn't going to let it slide, not yet. "That's strange," he said, tilting his head. "Because your system says otherwise." Her face tightened. Caught. Before she could respond, the man in the navy blazer stepped forward, his voice smooth but dripping with false authority. "Sir, we reserve the right to refuse service. I'm afraid we won't be able to accommodate you tonight." There it was, plain, blunt. No more pretending. Jonathan stood still, taking a slow breath, letting the words settle. Around the lobby, conversations quieted. A few guests looked over. He had two options, make a scene, or walk away with his dignity intact. He chose neither. He smiled. A small, knowing smirk. Then, without a word, he reached into his pocket and made a single call. His voice was calm. "It's me. Move forward with the purchase." Without waiting for a response, he turned and walked out. Outside, the air was thick with tension. Jonathan walked toward his Rolls-Royce, the sound of his shoes clicking against the pavement. He wasn't angry, not in the way they expected. He wasn't shocked. What amazed him was the audacity. A billionaire. A man who owned corporations, real estate, and businesses across the country, yet none of that mattered. All they saw was someone they didn't think belonged. But they had no idea who they had just dismissed. Inside the hotel, the young front desk clerk let out a small breath of relief as he walked away. "That could have gone worse," she muttered. The man in the blazer chuckled. "Yeah, well, he got the message. They thought they had one. But just as Jonathan reached the passenger door, a voice called out. "Sir! Wait!" Jonathan turned. A man in his mid-50s, wearing a dark brown suit and an expensive watch, hurried out. His name was Thomas Greer, the general manager. His smile was strained. I apologize for the confusion. Perhaps we can work something out." Jonathan turned to face him, silent. Greer hesitated. We may have an opening after all. Let me double-check." "No need," Jonathan replied simply, then got into the car. The door closed, the tinted windows separating them from Greer, who stood frozen, watching the tail lights disappear. Something told him this wasn't the end. And he was right. For most, that kind of humiliation would have ruined the night. But Jonathan Carter wasn't most people. As the Rolls-Royce glided through the city, his assistant Malcolm sat across from him. "It happened again, didn't it?" he asked. Jonathan looked out the window. "You already know the answer." Malcolm didn't ask how it made him feel. That was pointless. They both knew what mattered now, what came next. Jonathan picked up his phone, scanned an email from his real estate team, and looked up. "How fast can we move?" "Contracts are ready. Just waiting on your green light." Jonathan smiled. "Then let's close the deal." The next few weeks were quiet. Jonathan didn't go to the press. Didn't post on social media. He let his money do the talking. Through a holding company, his team finalized the acquisition of the Lexington Grand. The previous owners had been looking to sell quietly for months. It was a clean deal. No headlines. Just business. By the time the ink dried, Jonathan Carter owned the very hotel that had denied him service. But no one working there knew that, yet. That changed one morning, weeks later. The hotel buzzed with its usual morning rush. Guests checking out, luggage carts rolling, business travelers sipping overpriced coffee. At the front desk, the same young woman adjusted her tie, already exhausted. Then, an email popped up on her screen. Subject: Important ownership announcement. Staff meeting at 9 a.m. She opened it, confused. New ownership? Mandatory meeting? Her coworker leaned over her shoulder. His face fell. At exactly 9 a.m., the entire hotel staff gathered in the main ballroom. Management, kitchen staff, housekeeping, all present. Murmurs filled the air. Then he walked in. Jonathan Carter. Dressed in a tailored suit, calm, composed, completely in control. Whispers spread like wildfire. Faces turned pale. Others stiffened in place. At the back, Thomas Greer froze. Jonathan waited, letting the recognition set in. Then he spoke, his voice clear and measured. "Good morning. I won't take much of your time. I just wanted to introduce myself properly, since some of you have already met me." His eyes landed on the front desk staff. They looked away. "As of today, the Lexington Grand is under new ownership." My ownership. The words hit like thunder. I believe in hospitality. Real hospitality. The kind where every guest is treated with dignity and respect, no matter what they look like or where they come from. Silence. I also believe in second chances. A flicker of hope. However, some of you will not be staying. Tension crackled through the room. Effective immediately, we are implementing a new leadership structure. Anyone who cannot uphold the values of fairness, professionalism, and true hospitality, this is your notice. His assistant Malcolm stepped forward, handing envelopes to specific employees. Thomas Greer took his silently. He already knew. Jonathan's tone never wavered. For those who stay, there will be changes. Real ones. Diversity training. Strict accountability. And a leadership team that reflects the people who walk through these doors. He scanned the room one last time. This is not just about business. It's about standards. And from now on, those standards will be met. Then, just as smoothly as he had arrived, he turned and walked away. The room stayed frozen in silence. Some employees rushed out. Others whispered in shock. At the front desk, the young woman sat stiffly in her chair. She hadn't been handed an envelope, yet. But the weight of her mistake was suffocating. Her coworker, the man in the navy blazer, trembled as he held his termination letter, his expression stuck between disbelief and fury. He turned to Greer. He just walks in and decides who stays and who goes. Greer shook his head, bitterly. No, he decided that the night we threw him out. Just then, the phone at the front desk rang. The young woman flinched, then answered it in her most professional voice. Thank you for calling the Lexington Grand. How can I assist you? A pause. Her face changed. Why yes, sir. Absolutely. Right away. She hung up, slowly. The man beside her frowned. What did he say? She swallowed. He's coming back, and he wants his suite ready. As the day unfolded, whispers spread throughout the hotel. Employees from housekeeping to the management team began to feel the weight of Jonathan Carter's words. It wasn't just the threat of losing their jobs, it was the realization that the world they had lived in, where status, wealth, and appearance defined your worth, was about to be upended. Jonathan was no longer just a wealthy man, he was a symbol of justice, dignity, and transformation. By the afternoon, the hotel's old staff members who remained had already begun to change their approach. The employees who had been quick to judge Jonathan at first had now experienced his power. He had turned their world upside down, not with anger, but with action. Jonathan didn't just want to own the hotel. He wanted to remake it in his image. A place where every person, regardless of their background or status, was treated with respect. His wealth, his power, were simply tools to enact that change. No longer would the Lexington Grand be a symbol of elitism. Under his ownership, it would become a model of inclusion, professionalism, and dignity. The following week, a grand reopening event was held at the Lexington Grand. There were no extravagant speeches or media blitzes, just a quiet invitation extended to key leaders in the city and community. As the guests entered, the new staff greeted them with smiles that were genuine. The luxury, once reserved for the privileged few, was now accessible to all who entered with respect. The atmosphere had changed, it wasn't just about looking the part anymore. It was about feeling the part. Jonathan Carter stood at the back of the room, observing. He saw guests, black, white, young, old. Mingling, laughing, and enjoying the ambience of the hotel, but more than that, he saw the change in the staff. They were proud. They weren't just workers anymore. They were ambassadors of an idea, of a movement that Jonathan had set into motion. They understood that the true value of a hotel wasn't in its price tag, its marble floors, or its chandelier. It was in how you made people feel when they walked through the door. As Jonathan scanned the room, his gaze landed on Thomas Greer, who had been working the event. His expression was a mix of discomfort and realization. He approached Jonathan slowly, unsure of how to speak. Mr. Carter, Greer started, his voice low, I need to thank you. Jonathan raised an eyebrow, surprised. Greer continued, I've worked in this industry for over 30 years. And honestly, I've never seen anything like what you're doing here. You didn't just buy a hotel. You bought a future. A future where people will be treated with the dignity and respect they deserve. Jonathan smiled, but there was no smugness in his expression. I'm glad you see that. But it's not just me. It's all of us. We're all responsible for the way this place is run now. For a moment, there was silence between them. Then Greer nodded, a gesture of acknowledgement and newfound respect. "I'll do my best to make sure it stays that way," Greer said, his voice sincere. Jonathan nodded. "I'm counting on you." Later that evening, as the event wound down, Jonathan received a phone call from his assistant, Malcolm. "Sir," Malcolm said, "I wanted to let you know that we've finalized the contracts with the new team members, the diversity trainers, and the community leaders who will help reshape the hotel's vision." Jonathan leaned back against the wall, a sense of quiet satisfaction settling in. "Good. The work's just beginning. Let's make sure it's real, and not just talk." As he hung up the phone, he looked around one last time, taking in the success of the evening. He wasn't just a billionaire anymore. He had become a catalyst for real, meaningful change. The Lexington Grand was no longer just a luxury hotel, it was a testament to his belief that true wealth lies in respect, fairness, and creating a legacy of equality. As the night drew to a close, Jonathan stood alone in the grand ballroom of the Lexington Grand, surveying the room. The chandelier's lights cast a soft glow over the polished floors, reflecting the change he had ignited. He had always known that change wouldn't come easily. He'd witnessed the broken systems in place, the way people, especially those who looked like him, had been denied the opportunities and dignity they deserved, even within these so-called elite spaces. But what had unfolded tonight wasn't just about a lavish hotel or wealthy patrons, it was about something much bigger. Something that could ripple through the fabric of society. For the first time in a long while, Jonathan allowed himself to smile. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he was certain of one thing: the power he wielded as a business leader could be used to not only shape profitable ventures but also reshape society's values. As he walked toward the exit, his phone buzzed again. It was a message from his sister, Naomi. "John, I saw the story on the news. You really did it. I'm so proud of you. But you know this is just the beginning, right?" He smiled, his sister's words grounding him in the reality of what he was up against. The next step would be harder than this one. He would face resistance from the very systems he was trying to dismantle, and that wouldn't come without struggle. There would be people who fought back, those who didn't want to see a world where their privilege was questioned. But he couldn't turn back now. Not after everything that had led him here. He quickly replied to her message, "Yeah. And I'm ready for it." As he stepped into the night, the cool breeze brushing against his face, Jonathan couldn't help but think about the long journey ahead. He wasn't just a businessman anymore, he was now an advocate for a movement that had to spread beyond the walls of his hotel and into every corner of society. He would fight for people like him, who had been silenced, ignored, and disrespected, and ensure that they had the platforms and opportunities they deserved. The next morning, he called a meeting with his board. It was time to start thinking bigger. The Lexington Grand was just the first domino. Jonathan would push for systemic reform in the hospitality industry, a place where exclusion and racial bias had long thrived. But he didn't want to stop there. He envisioned a world where businesses, governments, and communities worked together to ensure that no one, no matter their background, was treated as less than human. In the days that followed, the changes at the Lexington Grand were immediate and visible. Staff training programs, diversity and inclusion workshops, and community outreach efforts began to roll out. Jonathan made it clear that his standards weren't just about appearances, they were about creating a culture of integrity, fairness, and respect. He was setting a precedent, not just for his hotel, but for the future of business as a whole. Final scene. Months later, as Jonathan stood at the podium during a national business conference, he looked out over an audience of industry leaders, activists, and media representatives. This was the moment he had been preparing for, the chance to speak on the platform he had created for himself, the one that could drive real change. His voice was calm but firm as he began his speech. "When I first walked through the doors of the Lexington Grand, I was greeted not as a guest, but as an outsider. My wealth and status meant nothing, because I didn't fit the mold. And that moment, that experience, pushed me to take action. Not just for myself, but for all those who have been mistreated, looked over, or made to feel inferior. The room fell silent as Jonathan continued, his words echoing with purpose. This isn't just about one man owning a hotel. It's about changing the entire system. It's about creating spaces where everyone is seen, heard, and respected. The Lexington Grand was just the beginning. What's next is bigger than any hotel or corporation. It's a call for all of us to do better, to be better. To lead with dignity, integrity, and compassion for every single person we meet. As Jonathan finished his speech, the room erupted into applause. But for Jonathan, the applause wasn't what mattered. It was the impact of his message, the seeds of change that were now planted, growing in the minds of those who had heard him speak. His work was far from over, but he knew this was just the start of something truly revolutionary. Ending reflection. Jonathan walked off the stage with a quiet sense of fulfillment, knowing the legacy he was building would transcend his wealth. He wasn't simply a billionaire business owner, he was now a catalyst for change. In the years to come, he would face obstacles, resistance, and moments of doubt, but he was certain of one thing: the world was not ready for the kind of change he was bringing, but it would have to be. The Lexington Grand had been a small step. The real work was just beginning.